Ladies and gentlemen, it is now 6:33 and a quorum of members is present, so the meeting of the Board of Education of the School District of New Berlin is called to order. Please call the roll.
Ms. Crosby.
Here.
Mr. Helmer. Mr. Kurth.
Here.
Ms. Manley.
Here.
Ms. Schulz.
Here.
Ms. Unger.
Here.
Ms. Wondercheck.
And Mr. Helmer did not alert me that he wasn't coming, so we'll probably expect him during closed session. I would entertain a motion to adjourn into closed session.
I move to recess into closed session pursuant to Section 19.851 C, E, and F of the Wisconsin statutes to consider A, the approval of closed session minutes of December 9th, 2019, and B, employment performance compensation matters pertaining to staff. Amen.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Kurth and a second by Ms. Manley. Please call the roll.
Mr. Kurth.
Yes.
Ms. Manley.
Yes.
Ms. Crosby.
Yes.
Ms. Schulz. Ms. Unger.
Yes.
Ms. Wondercheck.
We are moving into closed session. We'll return to open session around 7 p.m. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now 7 o'clock and we are returning from closed session into open session. In recognition of the serious and important nature of our efforts here, we will join in the Pledge of Allegiance. To the flag, please rise. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And now for those who wish to prepare for the meeting, we will have a moment of silence. This is a public meeting of the Board of Education. Prior to this meeting, notice was given to the public last Friday by posting the agenda at each district school, the district office, and the city library. The agenda was also posted on the district website. A copy of the agenda was forwarded to the Journal-Sentinel, the Waukesha Freeman, and the Waukesha Now, all of which have filed requests for all public notices. First item is the administrative team report.
So we will be having another elementary student representative update from Ronald Reagan. John G. was supposed to have given you the update, and how well it worked the last time was he was able to leave practice and go back to practice. Well, that was at West. So that didn't work out so well because we had it here at Ike tonight. So he instead has asked Mr. Reinke to provide a video update of the things that he wanted to share.
Yeah, sorry about that. Can you hear? Yeah, we had it all planned out really well, and then we realized, we saw on Facebook the other day that it was here. So that didn't work so well. So here, I'm going to get John's video set up here. And we'll get going.
Readiness has been a very busy place the last few months. I'm excited to share some of the big events with you. Ronald Reagan is home of our district's early learning program. Our ELP has two big events. The first was called Friendsgiving. In this event, they celebrated the new friends that they were making. In December, they had their Winter Wonderland celebration with families. At the celebration, they sang songs for their families and then did some different winter-themed crafts. Our student council has also been busy. In November, they organized our annual food drive in which we collected food for the New Berlin Food Pantry. They also started the Golden Broom Award. For the Golden Broom, they developed a rubric for what a pod should look like at the end of the day when students leave. Each pod is judged one time per week, and each week a winner is given the Golden Broom to proudly display in their pod. The Student Council also had a Spirit Week where each day we got to dress in a silly way. Finally, they sponsored our holiday door decorating contest. This year's theme was Holidays Around the World. The band, orchestra, and choir had their annual concert just before the winter break. For all of the concerts that we have, there is a show for students during the day and then a show open to everyone at night. This year, the 5th grade orchestra played 2 songs, which is pretty impressive, as they have only been playing for 2.5 months. The 6th grade orchestra played 3 songs, then they played a couple of songs together. The band played several songs, and students also played solos and duet. Again, with the band, it was impressive because they had only been learning to play for a few months, and they were able to put on a great show. Finally, as our choir put on a fantastic show, our choir is currently practicing to sing the national anthem at a Milwaukee Waves soccer game. After the winter break in gym, all of our students in 3rd through 6th grade have participated in a breakout box activity. To solve a breakout box, we had to finish different physical challenges as we gathered clues that helped us to figure out codes and unlock the locks on our breakout boxes. It was a great way to practice collaboration, critical thinking, and communication, as well as do some physical activities. Finally, our 1 million minute reading challenge officially kicked off. In this big initiative, we are working together as a school to see if we can read 1 million minutes at home. As of this morning, we have 326 active readers in the challenge. Our total minutes read is 101,371 minutes. During that time, over 1,400 books have been read, totaling over 91,000 pages. We have had 135 students earn their 250-minute reader badge, 63 students earn their 500-minute reading badge, 31 students earn their 700-minute reader badge, 31 students earn their 1,000-minute reader bookmark, and 3 students earn their 2,500-minute reader bracelet. Our current high reader has read 3,100 minutes at home. We have a few upcoming events. Our 5th and 6th grade Fine Arts Night is coming up next week. We also will have our school-wide gallery next week before Fine Arts Night. Each student will have multiple pieces of their artwork on display throughout the building and will have a piece of writing out for our families to read. Next week, we will be celebrating the end of the semester with our end of the semester assembly. At each end of the quarter or semester assembly, we get to learn from students involved in different high school activities. For this assembly, we will be hearing from the Ike Theater and Drama Club and also the New Berlin West football team. On Monday, January 27th, Damian Butchman is coming to Ronald Reagan to present his Adaptive Scholastic Athletic Program, ASAP, which will provide our Reagan community with an education-based, fully interactive, and 100% inclusive disability awareness assembly. Damien will teach students, educators, and administrators by putting them in a different pair of shoes, giving everybody a first-hand experiment that regardless of ability, everybody is capable. That is a really quick overview of some of the big events that have been going on at Reagan and a quick look at what is coming up. Feel free to come out and visit at any time. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask Mr. Ranke. Thank you and have a great night.
So again, sorry he wasn't able to be here, but does anyone have any questions? Because I don't want to disappoint him. Awesome. Oh yeah, well, it just got our pods were getting pretty messy with all the boots and snow pants, so every week it's like a traveling trophy, so great. So. All right, thank you. Have a great night.
And now for your board update from your secondary student rep, Nishi from Eisenhower.
Hello everyone. For an update relating to sports, last Tuesday night, girls varsity basketball won against Pewaukee in a buzzer beater for a final score of 53-51. Ike Dance competed at the Oshkosh Wildcat Invite on January 4th and won first place in D2 Jazz, first place in D3 Pom, and third place in D2 Hip Hop. Since the 2019 to 2020 school year marks the 50th anniversary of Eisenhower, we have started an Eisenhower Hall of Fame. There will be 3 main categories in the Hall of Fame, including athletics, fine arts, and distinguishable alumni. For an update related to activities, Ike DECA is taking part in the annual Polar Plunge event, where people who sign up are expected to raise money that will go to the Wisconsin Special Olympics. The event will take place on February 9th. Our Chick-fil-A Leader Academy Club had a Do Good December event where we asked companies to donate proceeds to give to families in need in New Berlin. Lastly, last Thursday, Eisenhower's NHS hosted a raffle fundraising event called #LoveForLucas for one of our Elmwood families whose 4-year-old son had been diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Many generous raffle items were donated from local businesses and individuals, such as a $100 gift card to Maddie's, a Packers sports basket, and big-ticket items such as a 50-inch smart TV and 2 Princeton Club memberships. Many New Berlin residents came and donated, and in total, we raised a total of $9,550. Thank you.
Thank you, Nishi. And as the board is aware, we are actually on a road tour with the board. This is your first visit this year, and our goal is to get you out to all of the schools. And our goal is to do that prior to the end of the school year. And so with that, we are actually have your host school admin team here to do a brief presentation on the things that are happening here at Eisenhower, followed by a brief tour of which we would actually ask those of you that are here as guests to please feel free to join in on the tour. And then we'll wrap back up here and then get going with the rest of the meeting. Go ahead.
Hello, good evening. Can I just tell you, I'm about 10 times more comfortable doing this presentation at Eisenhower than where we normally do it. I just feel this is where we have our staff meetings, so I feel like I'm at home, so this is great. But welcome to Eisenhower. One quick thing that I don't even know if we knew. As of this morning, I signed the permission for our bookkeeper to send the funds from the proceed for the Love for Lucas, and that check is actually a round number of $10,000 because as of this morning, someone called in and said, how far away are you from 10 grand? And we told him, and that person said, go ahead and put it in. So it's going to be a round number of $10,000 that we were able to give
Very
to
nice.
Love for Lucas. Great job by the NHS. That was outstanding. Sorry, didn't mean to steal the thunder. So good evening. Welcome to Eisenhower. My name is Matt Buckley. I'm the proud principal here at New Berlin Eisenhower. Allow me to introduce the folks with me. To my left, your right, Mr. Kevin Fitzgerald, Athletic and Activities Director. The two fighting to my right would be Ms. Jennifer Foch, Mr. Kevin Gemignani. We're just trying to get the presentation going. Our presentation night had many hands helping to make it. One of the things we desperately wanted to have tonight, since we are at Eisenhower, was to have Eisenhower student voices be present. I'm not sure if you're aware, it is the end of the semester as of this week. It is exam week, and apparently there's a football game this evening. So it was a little difficult to get some students to come, but we are happy to say that through working with one of our brand new classes, our digital media course, students interviewed, edited, and prepared some video excerpts this evening that we'll be sharing as part of our presentation. So I hope you'll be patient with us as the adults fumble with the technology, trying to make sure that it works properly. But we're lucky to have students who are willing to help us. We're trying. Lucky to have students who are willing to take on those challenges for us. So this year at New Berlin Eisenhower, as we said, and you've probably heard before, we're happy to say it's our 50th year of being in service to the community. When we looked at this year and what we wanted to do, it became very clear to us that we wanted to look back and celebrate the 50 years of success while we work in the present and plan for the future of what it is that we need to do to continue that success and the successes that Eisenhower has had. It became very clear and is very clear to our staff and in working with our staff and to ourselves as the administrative team that we need to think about how to engage our 21st century Lions, what it is that we need to do for them and with them in order to get them to push them to the areas in the world that they want to get to. A significant point of pride for the school over those 50 years. This is the fifth year that Eisenhower has, in succession, the fifth year that Eisenhower has significantly exceeded expectations on the state DPI report card, something we're very proud of. Not many schools can make that claim, and there's going to be some more data coming later that I think other schools will be very proud and might be a bit jealous to have, or jealous not to have, and proud that we're proud that we do have. One of the new accolades this year that we received and we're very proud of is that we were named one of the top 500 STEM schools in the nation by Newsweek. That criteria was developed by STEM.org, and I don't want to read the slide to you, but it essentially means that the criteria by which we were awarded that was determined by the best science, technology, engineering, and math experiences that we provide for students, while also preparing them for post-secondary success. So they took an algorithm, and only 5 schools in the state of Wisconsin were able to have that stake, or could stake that claim. Over my time working in education, this is my 20-plus year in education, that's the largest change I think I've seen. In the way that New Berlin, in the way that Eisenhower reaches out into the community and tries to embrace what's happening out in the real world and bring that learning into the school for students is something that we're incredibly proud of, and you should be incredibly proud of, because it's not just something we're doing, it's something that comes as part of being this wonderful district. We don't measure students by the same things at the same times. We try to find all different ways to measure students. I think STEM and the work that we've done in STEM over the 50 years, and most recently probably in the last 10 as a district, have been outstanding. Ike has always been a high-performing school. It's something we're proud of and we're not shy of saying. This measure is a new measure that we're also proud to say marks us as one of the top schools in the state and in the country. To do this and to receive this award, you need highly skilled teachers, which we have, who are consistently and constantly developing in these fields, researching these fields, looking into the fields of STEM, and creating dynamic learning experiences for students. And without those learning experiences created by that very talented staff, we would not be able to have this type of award. So we're very proud of our staff and, of course, of our students. But you shouldn't hear it from me. You need to hear it from Vidyeth, who's one of our students who has excelled in the STEM area, specifically in computer science.
I think there's 2 things that are things that I would really highlight that helped me. One is an internship called Aurora WDC. And it's a internship through the company where we analyze articles and discover new things about technologies like AI, 3D printing, Internet of Things, and we analyze these articles, catalog them, and put it into a database for this company because it's an information company. So they collect all this information and they help other companies use that information to create analysis to help their business. And then another internship that I had that also stemmed from Eisenhower was a Northwestern mutual internship, where over the summer last year, I got to intern with Northwestern Mutual and see basically what I would do if I got a job as a software engineer. And it was really helpful because I got to learn different languages that I never learned, and I also got to see how different teams in the company work together in computer science to help drive like the company's focus.
So creating purposeful instruction that helps students recognize new pathways or pathways that didn't exist maybe when I was in school or even when I was teaching in school, as well as helping students understand the world around them and the opportunities they have, as well as connecting them to them is something that is paramount to STEM and paramount to the work that our teachers do. And I think we do that out in an outstanding fashion. All the work that we do in our school is directly linked to our school action plan, which comes from our district action plan. I'm not going to read that to you. You're more than welcome to take a look at it if you like. I've heard people only read the slides or listen to the presentation, so feel free to do one of the two. What I'd like you to look and notice about those goals, as you may look through them now or later, we're trying to touch in our school goals on what we think are the three important aspects of engaging students in today's world. First, of course, is academic. We're an academic institution. We want students to perform well academically, so we need to make sure we're taking steps to do things in the academic realm. Secondly, and something that I think we're seeing emerging in our world and in our schools, especially in our teenagers, are the needs to address their social emotional learning and their social emotional wellness. So we have a goal around social emotional wellness for our students and creating a culture and a community here at Eisenhower that supports all of our students and can help them in many facets of their life. And lastly, of course, we want to make sure that they're ready for whatever may come next. So the college and career readiness that we're always working on, making sure that those students are measured by those readiness standards and prepared. I mentioned earlier some data that I think other schools are hopefully jealous of. Those are 5-year trends and two pretty significant data points for us. The first on the left is the 5-year trend in ACT graduates data. The state average over that 5-year time is a 19.9. Eisenhower's average over that, if I did the math quickly, is a 23.4, if my math is correct. Might be off by a 10th. Again, outstanding work by our students, outstanding community. On the right side are the number of students, not the percent of students, the literal number of students who fall below the 30th percentile in their reading scores. Very small number. Again, other schools are very jealous and would love to have that tiny number. An incredibly successful school we have at Eisenhower, and we're not shy about it, but we know that we're still missing engaging some students. We know that 23.4 composite over 5 years needs to go higher and should go higher. So how do we do it? Because we're already doing wonderful things. That's the work we've undertaken this year.
Thank you, Matt. So as Mr. Buckley had stated, we're always focused on engaging our students, and the work that we've been doing, as Mr. Buckley shared, is paying dividends. But last May, we actually challenged our staff to start thinking about ways that we can reach more students or reach them more effectively. And so in one of our Wednesday professional learning sessions, we had asked staff to try to identify common themes. We call them lagging skills. The phrase lagging skills comes from Dr. Ross Green's work with collaborative and proactive solutions, something that our 4 elementary schools have been working on starting last school year. They've had a lot of success, and as a way to prepare the secondaries to continue this work, we were using the language of Dr. Ross Green to identify some of the things that our secondary teachers see as things that we really want to focus on, things that our students need and that we can help them grow and become stronger in. Over the summer, the Ike administrative team also made a commitment to trying to find some type of source, a book study, where we could support that work for student engagement and give a blueprint, if you will, for our staff to work on throughout the year. And it's kind of driving our professional development on those Wednesday sessions. In our first days back, we actually had staff members join our Ike Professional Learning Committee. And one of the activities that we came up with as a group is kind of what you see up on the screen. We were trying to figure out what the Ike learner is. Our staff, without going too deeply, range in learning decades from the late 70s, thank you, yeah. All the way through our newest teacher, who's actually, this is her first year teaching, I believe she's 23 at the time. So we were trying to see what are the differences. And some things that we learned is the influence of the staff when they were in school, their teachers, their parents, their coaches, those are the primary influences in their lives, both academically and socially. Yet today's Ike learner, it's their peers, first and foremost, and then, of course, as we all know, the influence of social media. So how do you take a staff that has an influence base of adults and try to match their skills and engage students whose influences are far, far different? On top of it, our students are coming to us with challenges that we never even thought of. And when we were in school, they were things that never even came across our mind. But through the activity, we discovered that our students are bringing a lot of things to the table, a lot of strengths. But again, these challenges that we're not familiar with, we didn't experience. So how can we match with our students and get them more engaged? And what it's turned into, like I said, is a book study that we're working on, because the whole point is we want to work with a group of students that are very, very different than staff, but we still want to make them successful people. But we have to keep in mind that the world that we are preparing them for is not the world that we're living in right now. So even our seniors, after 4 years of college, and Matt Hunt, a counselor at West, had made this clear, and he'll do it tomorrow at our ACP Family Night. There are certain skills that we don't even know exist yet, but we have to have our students be prepared for, because that's what the job market is asking. So the challenge that we have this year is how do we engage those students and get them prepared for that college and career readiness, things that Vidyeth referenced in his video. So we have a lot of different committees that we've started this year. We have an ACT committee, we have a literacy committee, we have a social emotional learning committee, and we have what's called the Principal Advisory Committee. The Principal Advisory Committee is primarily students and Mr. Buckley. The other committees are various staff members throughout the building. And again, all to how can we focus on increasing student engagement. So we've narrowed it down to two areas, somewhat obvious, but at the same time very, very important. We're looking at the academics and we're looking at the social. Obviously, through academics, we're looking at classroom, we're looking at curriculum and content, trying to make sure that the academic and career planning is where it needs to be for each individual student. But with social engagement, and Mr. Fitzgerald, of course, will share there, we're talking about co-curriculars, extracurriculars. We're also talking about social emotional learning, relationships with their peers, relationships with adults, both in the building and outside in the student's world. Two numbers up there, which we're very, very proud of, but we also want to be very, very mindful of. As you look at college and career readiness benchmarks, again, as Vidyeth had stated in his video, our students have a lot of opportunities to learn what they need to learn in order to be prepared for the real world. We found with our students that they do find their coursework meaningful, but if you look, we still have about a quarter of those students that we're still not reaching, that aren't seeing the connections between what they're doing in class and what they need to be doing for the rest of their lives. We also have a small group of students that aren't finding their coursework challenging. Now, maybe that means that we're not pushing them hard enough, or maybe perseverance. They're just not where we need them to be to continue working hard, learning from failure, taking risks, and things like that. So those are the types of things we're trying to focus on when it comes to engagement. But again, talking about the academics is great, but we have a senior, Rachel Schaefer, who's going to share a little bit of her experiences with her time here at Eisenhower.
Learning a new language in general is a way for you to experience different perspectives on many things. And I also think this sort of ties in with like looking at jobs differently, because we sat down during Spanish 4 one time and we just talked about like our plans for the future with Spanish, and we just like went through possible options, and a lot of people realized that like with either CAP or AP credits, they're already practically qualifying for a minor, certificate, or anything like that in college. So it's really not that hard to add on Spanish to a degree, and that can really help make you stand out against other people who are also getting degrees at college.
So that's just one example from Rachel. Tomorrow, again, we have our ACP Family Night. One of the breakout sessions that we'll have will get more in-depth in the conversation about college and high school. Ms. Kwiatkowski, who's in the back, will be leading those breakout sessions, giving an idea not only for our high school parents, but even as our rising 7th and 8th grade parents, so they do stick around to hear about some of those opportunities that we make available, not just at Eisenhower, but also at New Berlin West as well. The other thing is we're looking at this with academic engagement, the things that we have been working on as a school, again, primarily through our Wednesday professional learning, but also in other areas, such as in our collaborative team meetings within our content areas. We have Universal Design for Learning, an initiative that, if my memory is correct, I think we're in year 3, which is showing great dividends for us. Co-serving, essentially removing barriers for all students, so curriculum is accessible for everyone, but at the same time designing lessons and activities that are engaging and that have a little bit of variety and diversity, so all students can find something that will grab their interest. Also as well, there's a couple stats that kind of go in here within this. At the end of last year, we did a survey. We do it every year through Hanover Research, and we had found that 62% of our teachers truly believe that they are using universal design for learning effectively in their classroom as an instructional strategy. That's a great number, but still a lot of room for growth. Last Wednesday, we had a mid-year check with the Ike staff, and that number's gone up to 74%. So we are seeing a great amount of movement, but I have to say that the biggest thing for that movement is we have been encouraging teachers to take those risks. They're doing it by standing up and sharing examples of what they're doing in the classroom during these professional learning sessions on Wednesdays. They're discussing it in their collaborative meetings, and they're taking risks in the classrooms. We are challenging our teachers to use universal design for learning. They are emailing myself, Mr. Buckley, Ms. Foch, inviting us to come into their classrooms and see it, and we talk about it later. We've seen a lot of growth just in that one strategy. We also, of course, have our co-serving, which is another work in progress, which we're very, very proud of. And at the bottom, we're modeling a number of literacy strategies. There's high leverage literacy strategies that have been introduced by the district that both secondaries are using at this time. And a lot of our professional learning, we're actually using these strategies as a way to model them for staff so they can see how they work, talk about it with each other, and then bring it back to their classroom. So just a couple examples up there visually on the board. A Socratic seminar, and then a Wordle. It used to have a different name when I was a teacher, but that's a Wordle, something out of one of our English classes. So just two examples of the strategies that we're modeling, or our staff are modeling for each other in professional learning, and that's appearing in the classroom.
So socially, we know we need to engage our students in different ways than we have in the past. Students are coming to school with different challenges than we could have ever fathomed ourselves when we looked back at our own high school experiences. And part of the data that frames that work for us is projected for you. 75% of our students are engaged in a co-curricular activity, which might be a sport or a club. That is an exceptionally high number, but we know that students are more successful when they are engaged. So we know there's a quarter of our population that we need to work with to find out how to engage them. The nice part about working at Eisenhower and for our students too is that we have the opportunity to have the clubs, have them create clubs that they wish to have. So I know we had a pre-vet club created in the last year, and a student video will tell you about that shortly.
In speech, I gave a presentation about mental health, and then I found out that other kids were also interested in that. And then we started talking more, and then it kind of encouraged me to start Change of Minds, a club at Eisenhower, and then that just empowered everyone more to kind of speak up for what they want to do, and gave everyone a community to kind of speak their mind.
So that's one of the ways we are able to engage our students here at Eisenhower, is to let them tell us what they need and what they'd like to start and foster that leadership. We also know that we need to foster social emotional wellness for our students and perseverance through whatever the task may be, academic or social. So we've done a number of things this year to do that, including an emphasis on dignity and respect within our conversations with students. We had class-wide meetings to emphasize that. We expanded Unity Day to an entire week this year to emphasize being good humans, first and foremost. Counselors deliver monthly advisory lessons to our grade levels, focusing solely on social and emotional learning. One of the highlights, I think, for me this year and for the rest of the admin team was the Courage Retreat. We know that our students place a lot of emphasis on that social connection with their peers, more so than they do with adults. For whatever reason, that's just what they find important today. So the Courage Retreat was put on with Youth Frontiers, but it was led by 28 seniors who gave up their day to work with our 8th grade class. And those connections and the conversations that were had over that day were really profound, and we definitely saw a change in some of our students and their behaviors after that retreat. So it was really exciting to see. We've had a lot. Are you trying to cut me off? Oh, okay. So we've done a lot this year. Recently, a panel of Ike staff was selected by Marquette University to present at the Advancement for the Humanities Conference on how we use our curriculum to foster our students as good humans. So we'll be presenting on Valentine's Day at Marquette University. And with that, Mr. Fitzgerald can talk about co-curse.
Thank you, Ms. Foch. I apologize. As you've heard in the videos and as you've heard in the presentation, we have a very highly engaged student body. And with that, we have a very supportive staff. And those two combine to provide the best experience possible for our students. And in the areas of co-curriculars, we actually have 28 co-curriculars not considered sports that are considered clubs. And without putting other schools that are like enrollments, this is a high number. We do have a very wide variety of school-sponsored clubs. And if you dive a little bit further into the statistics, 3/4 of our students are participating in at least one co-curricular activity. The benchmark in my field in athletics and activities, schools want to hit 80%. And I'm proud to say that we're almost hitting 80%, not even including band, choir, and orchestra. If you were to throw those in there, we're hovering right around 85%, and that's a number I know we're very, very proud of. It speaks to the well-rounded experience, the student experience that our students have, and again, it does not come without heavy staff involvement and heavy staff support, because we do have very, very busy students. They're doing a ton of different things, and in order for them to excel at all that they're doing, we have to be very supportive of that. Again, diving a little bit further into the statistics, number of students that are involved in more than one co-cur, that's over half. So 53% of our students are participating in more than one club or activity. And then the very important stat here, we always wanted to correlate into success, not only in that club or in that activity, but we wanted to correlate obviously academically. And that's doing that at a clip of about nearly 3/10 higher GPA than the traditional student. So 3.63 is where our cumulative student GPA is at for those that are participating in at least one co-cur. If you take a look at athletics, I'm going to use figures from last year because obviously we're right smack dab in the middle of this year. We sponsor 24 WIA sports. And in our enrollment last year of 801, that puts us pretty much smack dab in the middle of WIA Division II. When we co-op in boys volleyball and boys swim and wrestling and girls golf, we combine the enrollments, and then that turns us into Division I. But from pretty much all other sports, we're Division II. And then in the sports of soccer and football, we fall to Division III. So just a snapshot of that. That enrollment of 801, last year we had 676 student athletes. Those numbers are counted twice for multiple sport athletes, but you can see 404 male, 272 female. That's a pretty high rate of students that are participating in athletics here at Eisenhower. Total number of students participating in multiple sports, 185. And then getting down to the very impressive numbers, cum GPA for all student athletes, 3.48. Total number of student athletes with a 3.0 GPA or higher, 78% of our student athletes. So pretty incredible figures right there. 21 out of 24 sports are above 3.0, and 13 out of 24 sports are above 3.5. Nishi, I know you know all about that with your sports. You guys are almost at 4.0. It's incredible. But again, very much figures and stats we're very, very proud of. Again, I go back to we have a very highly engaged student body, but we also have a very highly engaged and supportive staff that allows this to happen. And I was told, I know I have to speak quickly, but I was told I have at least a minute to plug a very important event that we have coming up. So on February 15th, Saturday, February 15th, we have a basketball doubleheader versus Pewaukee. You mentioned the doubleheader buzzer beater. That was a big game for our girls. That's our rematch. So on Saturday, February 15th, we have that doubleheader, boys and girls, here at Eisenhower. And then the highlight of the evening is a 50th anniversary celebration for Eisenhower Athletics. In this 50th year, we have a storied success of having storied success in athletics, arts, academics, and on this particular evening, we're going to be celebrating athletics. Another highlight of that event is going to be our induction for our inaugural Hall of Fame. Nishi mentioned this before. In our 50th anniversary, we are having an Eisenhower Hall of Fame, and in this very first year, we're going to have an Athletics Hall of Fame. So we'll have our inaugural Athletics Hall of Fame class inducted on the 15th. And to go through it quickly, Pam Washburn, who's actually formerly Bartnick, you'll find her name all over our gym wall on the record boards. She's actually an Eisenhower community member right now. Has a daughter that's in our basketball program, and we're excited to have her continue on with the success there. She's a three-sport athlete. She was the Wisconsin Female State Athlete of the Year in 1989, so she comes with a pretty impressive resume. Mike Hart was our first professional athlete. He was drafted by the Mariners and then played for the Orioles and the Twins. Hall of Fame and legendary coach Jeff Setz won state titles in both football and softball here at Eisenhower. Mike Wilson, longtime athletic director, was at the forefront of a lot of the success and the growth here for athletics. And then finally, the team that's being inducted is the 1995 football team, Eisenhower's first state championship team. So this is going to be an incredible night. If you haven't been to Whirly Ball yet, I implore you to just Google it, take a look at the images. It looks like a pretty awesome venue. There's private bowling. There's, of course, Whirly Ball. Dinner and drinks is all included in ticket prices. So please tell your friends. Please see me if you have any questions or any interest in getting a table or tickets. And then I'll, of course, see Director Amanda Ferguson if you have any questions from the Educational Foundation of New Berlin. So thank you. Join us for an incredible evening, and now I'll kick it over to Principal Buckley.
Oh, that's you. That was you. Oh, me. There you go. That's the last slide. Thank you. Hard to pack 50 years of amazing and present state of amazing and hopefully 50 more years of amazing into a presentation. So thank you for your patience and listening to us. You look like you need to stretch your legs, so we'll be happy to take you on a tour in just a moment. But please know it's our pleasure, and we serve the community and we serve the students of Eisenhower every day with a smile on our face because of the great community that we're able to work in. And we'll continue to ask the question of what do we need to save from the past and continue to keep the traditions of excellence going, as well as what do we need to work on to make sure that we have at least 50 more years of excellence here at New Berlin Eisenhower. So with that, we'll be happy to take you on a tour. If there are any questions about anything we talked about in the presentation, we can walk and talk. Otherwise, at your leisure, we'll start in a minute or two after you stand up and stretch out. How's that? Thank you. Thank you for your time. We're going to go out that door over there.
board like, you'll actually be able to see some of the things that we'll be looking for support on in the future.
All right, we're returning from our tour, and now we're moving on to privilege of the floor. So this portion of the meeting is an opportunity for you to come and voice your concerns to the board, so please do not be offended when we quietly listen. We may even take notes. We do not immediately respond to your questions and comments. This is a time for you to talk and for us to listen. Thank you for coming to voice your comments and concerns. So when I call your name, please step up to the microphone, address the chair, and state your name and address. Each presentation is to be restricted to a maximum of 3 minutes. Privilege of the floor will be limited to 1/2 hour. Presentations are not to be designed for purposes of engaging others in a debate in this forum. Discussions of certified, classified, or professional personnel or of individual Board of Education members should not be considered an appropriate topic for this forum, and the speaker will be ruled out of order. So we have Chris, always say it, Moats. Got it.
Superintendent Gars, Board President Crosby, members of the board and administration. It's an honor to be here tonight at Eisenhower High School and Middle School. Having 2 daughters at this school, I have the opportunity to be here for many events, and I have to say, it's inspiring and amazing when I walk in and I think of all the students and teachers and administrators, parents, and coaches who have led our students in our community over these past 50 years. One of the things that I thought that maybe we should think about is the community engagement part of this great Eisenhower experience. We all know about the athletics and the academics, but just in the past year, a few of the events that our family has been able to participate in or attend that are community related include the dance team going to Mitchell Field to welcome the war veterans back for the honor flight ceremony. The University of Wisconsin-Madison Singers Group coming to Eisenhower, who hosted them to showcase their musical dance and vocal skills. It's a group that provides culture to primarily smaller communities, I believe, but it was just such a great event for the community here in New Berlin. And lastly, the pancake breakfast and craft fair that was hosted here at Eisenhower. Just a tremendous opportunity to invite people from New Berlin to see what we're all about. So I wonder, how can these great events get pulled off? We do our little share, but there are many people who do so much for this community and for this school. And I wanted to just recognize those folks. They do a tremendous job. I wonder how they do it. And then I realized, that's the Ike way, to get things done well and to just be that part of the community. So going forward, I hope that the board can maybe publish those community events and things that we do for the community in the newsletters and the annual report, just so that the community can see those. I know of those few things, but there are many more, and I think it's very important that those be documented. Going forward, what I would like is for this board to really, kind of work to make Eisenhower better for those next 50 years. Maintain it as a high school and keep the community active and making the Ike way continue. Thank you.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is superintendent's update. Do you have one?
Yes, first of all, Mr. Moats, thank you for your comments. Certainly much appreciated and very difficult to follow. But I did want to mention there are other events that are occurring that are school-specific. That last week we had our academic career planning night over at New Berlin West, which is an opportunity for our students and their parents to essentially take a look and visit varying presentations and various booths about the different co-curriculars and other opportunities and courses as well. I think during advisory here at Eisenhower, you did your course carousel today or the last couple days. Yeah, my daughter came home and told me about it, so must have been a good experience for her. We are actually having that event here tomorrow for the Eisenhower families. So if you're a parent, like some of us are, look forward to seeing you there. We also have college and career readiness event series at our schools, which are done with various partners. One of our significant partners is Junior Achievement, who helps support us in our career fairs at the secondary. Along with that, though, we also do things like BizTown for all of our fifth graders, where kids actually apply for jobs and actually get to work in an actual business town in a facility. So I know my kids had gone through it. My daughter was a banker. My son, not sure what he was. I think he was at Culver's or whatever it was. But they also get to learn about personal finance while they're there, as far as what you do with the check that you get, and then what can you spend your money on. And then we also do things like Jump Into Your Future Day, which are actually hosted at all of our elementary schools, which is a kind of a kid-friendly, elementary-friendly version of Career Day. And I'm not sure if any of you, Crislin, I didn't see you at Orchard Lane last week, but I know that you've done presentations at the elementary.
I have, yeah. This is the first year I didn't do it, actually, since my daughter left last year. And
yeah.
But I always did like a mock trial with the kids for 3rd through 6th. Fourth through 6th, because the younger kids, not so much. But it was a lot of fun. I always enjoyed doing it because
Right.
it's amazing to listen to what these kids come up with.
Right.
When you give them a fact pattern, and it's a great event.
There too, I back to Mr. Moat's point, we had husbands of our teachers and staff members are helping out. It was just a great community event for Orchard Lane, and certainly much more than just the experience the kids got. It was just that opportunity for that community partnership. And then, again, I want to iterate the 50 years of sports and the Hall of Fame induction. I do know that I've already bought a ticket, and I've been working with our corporate, some of our vendors to actually purchase tables for the event. And so I do know that the tickets are selling. It should be a great night, and we look forward to seeing you all there, hopefully. And I know Susan's been involved with the foundation and the event planning. So thanks for your help with that, because I think it's going to take all of our efforts to make this a success, but it should be a great night and a great event fundraiser for the foundation. So those are my updates.
All right, thank you. That moves us on to the consent agenda. Are there any items that should be pulled out for separate consideration?
I do just want to point out that the groups that are being proposed are non-curriculum related groups, and they are also not funded by the school district.
Do I have a motion for the consent agenda?
Move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Kurth and a second by Ms. Manley. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Hands down. All opposed? Motion passes. Moves us on to our regular agenda. The first item is the first read of revised policy 5114, open enrollment.
So what I would like to do is ask you to table this item temporarily until we get through the presentation and through the dialogue that the board will work through to determine how best to address the policy. I actually wanted to just put the policy on here as a first read so that it would allow you for changes at the next board meeting, should you have any. One of the things that has come up is, are we going to leave the word may or will have them reapply at 7th grade? So that's something that I think maybe we should clarify from the board. But again, it allows you as the board to determine any recommended changes, and again, depending on how the conversation goes with the next agenda item, which is continued discussion for open enrollment. Is that okay?
Yes, yeah, we will revisit this after the discussion.
So with that, I'd like to invite our team to come up. And essentially, we've taken what the board has provided us with direction over the course of the last several meetings, and we have come up with a recommendation that we would like to share with the board to consider. And certainly, we are just simply looking for direction from the board so that we're very clear on what the board wants us to bring as they finalize seats at the next board meeting.
Okay, so I'm going to have the teaching and learning team is going to kind of give you a little overview of some data and then kind of get into the recommendations. So if you guys can get the clicker, go to the topics. Thank you. So they're going to kind of really talk through the considerations for regular education and special education seats, and then at the end we'll kind of share our recommendations, knowing that it is the board's decision, but we wanted to kind of share a few things with you in order to make that decision. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
We first started to look to see what do we know about the students who are new to us in the school district of New Berlin. So not necessarily the students who started with us right away in kindergarten. So we took a look at that picture, and the number of students is captured here that are currently in the district that started with us after kindergarten. That first section to the left is students who are special ed versus students who are not special ed. And we're roughly around 9% currently of students who are special ed, and this represents about 7.5% who comes into us. So we're a little bit lower in that area for the students who are new to us. When we were looking at the economically disadvantaged students, we're a little bit higher. So our district's right around 12-13% typically, and the students who are new to us are averaging about 18%. It's just a little bit picture of who are they. We then looked at the ACT, and currently we have 1191 students in the district who came to us after kindergarten. Out of those students, 827 enrolled in grades 7 through 12 at the secondary level. So we took a deeper dive into their ACT scores, and the composite average of the students who started with us after kindergarten was a 22.4. When we looked specifically at the students who came to us in grades 10 through 12, that average was a 20.8. So when they came to us later in their journey here, they did score a little bit lower than those who came to us earlier. For some reference, we also added our district 2019 ACT average, and we took out those students that we counted from 10 through 12, and that average was a 23.8. And then our district graduates, or district 11th grade scores was a 22.7. So that's what those numbers represent there for ACT picture. We also took a deeper dive into our remediation scores. So we were able to get data from the UW system about our students who graduated between 2013 and 2016. And who are those students when they matriculated onto a UW college campus that had to take a remedial math or English course? And so those are those non-accredited, but you have to pay for courses in order to proceed within your 4-year degree. And so in English language arts, they came from both West and Eisenhower. It was about 50-50 depending on any given year, and you can see those are fairly low numbers each year. But out of those students, we noticed 45% of the students who needed a remediation course came here 4th grade or later. And why did we look at 4th grade, or why did we see that in common? Well, 3rd grade, if you look at national research, is really a pivot point in a student's education, and they transition from learning to read to then reading to learn. So we found that quite interesting that 4th grade was a trend point. When we look at math, same group of students between the graduates of 2013 to 2016, we noticed same trend, about 50-50. They're coming out of both West and Eisenhower. A little bit higher numbers, but 59% of the students who needed math remediation course were new to us after 4th grade. I'm going to take a deeper dive into the students who came to us between 10th and 12th grade. So these are students who either enrolled in 2018-19 or 2019-20. And why I'm talking about costs is because in the next couple slides, I'm going to be talking about GPA and credit deficiencies. Both, sometimes the students need a little extra support, or they're taking advantage of some of the great programs that we already offer. So it's important to note, despite when they get here, they're still our students. We want to educate them as best as any other student in our district. And so they do have access to early college credit program, the dual enrollment academies, GPS manufacturing, which is like a manufacturing youth apprenticeship program, GTO 2, so if they come to us credit deficient and we're not sure how else they could graduate because sometimes the graduation requirements don't match up from Wisconsin high school to Wisconsin high school because each school board maintains their own graduation policies, so we need to sometimes send them to GTO 2, and then also new pathways out of CISA. So the GPA data for students who are new to us compared to students who have been with us since kindergarten, we've had the GPA of average existing students, when you just look at the 10 through 12 students, so I took out the 9th grade students to be fair, is 3.3 across the district, which I think is pretty incredible. We have the Eisenhower Gpa of the students who are new to us in 10th through 12th grade of a 2.68. So just some history, when they come to us, we take what GPA, if they have an A, we transcribe it as a 4.0. If they have a B, it's a 3.0. So their previous grades are averaged in with the grades they get here, 2.68. And so that's, again, I want to stretch an average. We get some fantastic students who are 4.0, and we have some students who maybe struggled a little bit too, both coming our way. West GPA is 2.14. So there you can see just a comparison of the students. We also took a look at credit deficiency. Again, 10th through 12th grade from 2018-19 to 19-20. And 37% of the students who came to us in 10th through 12th grade, we were considered credit deficient. So that means if they're in 10th grade and they don't have the 6 credits that they needed to have from 9th grade, we would consider them credit deficient because we have to build them up so that they're able to graduate with their peers in some way, shape, or form. When we took those students out and looked across all of our student body at both West and Eisenhower, the 10th through 12th grade students, we had 1%, that's incredible, 1% of our student body was credit deficiency. I think that's something to be really proud of. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amanda.
Hi, so as Kelly was presenting some data on any student who was new to us and some trends that we found, students with disabilities were certainly included in that same data set. The next couple of slides I'm going to talk to you about are some considerations that are just specific to students with disabilities, and then I will also get into the seat availability that we will have this coming school year in special education. So what you have in front of you here is when we look at the students with disabilities who have enrolled in our district after kindergarten, you will notice that from 2017-18 up to 2019-20, there's at least half or more of the students we have with disabilities that we were unable to educate in one of our 6 buildings. And of those, what you see parenthetical, that percentage of students are the percentage of students of that percentage who are secondary students. So for example, this year alone, 54% of our students who came to us after kindergarten who have disabilities who are outplaced, or 54% of the students who are outplaced came to us after kindergarten, and of those, 100% of the students are secondary ages. Does that make sense? Okay. Another piece for us to consider are sometimes the additional costs that are associated with educating students with disabilities when we are unable to educate them within one of the programs offered in our 6 buildings. So excluding transportation, I gave you the cost to educate the students with disabilities that we are unable to provide programming for them, again, in one of our 6 buildings, and you'll see that cost ranging from just under $200,000 to just over $250,000. And then I also gave you some example costs of what each of those programs that we may have to send a student to costs per year. Again, excluding transportation and excluding any other related services that they might get there.
Is that total cost or just for students that enrolled after kindergarten?
So that would be student total cost. That's a great question. But when you go back to the previous slide, the majority of those students came to us after kindergarten. And the majority of those costs are coming from secondary.
That is total cost for the district of those additional, okay.
Of those students with disabilities who we can't educate within one of our 6 buildings, correct.
Perfect, thank you.
Yep, absolutely. I also wanted to provide some example transportation costs. While transportation in and of itself is an administrative function, when a student with a disability has transportation in their IEP or in their 504, that determination was made by a team of individuals, and it was based on disability-related needs. So it's not something that Superintendent Garza could just take out or that I could just take out. It is something that is a team decision, and I wanted to give you some costs associated with that. McKinney-Vento is also some specialized transportation that comes into play when students are either in out-of-home care or homeless, so they're displaced for one reason or another, and it's the responsibility of the receiving district and the resident district to provide that transportation to that student. That still comes into play under open enrollment. And so you can see some costs associated with that. It's also important to note that Title 1A, where we get some of our allocation for McKinney-Vento transportation, we have currently $12,000 allocated for that alone, and that's 10% of our total allocation that we get for Title I, which is a pretty substantial amount. When we also think about other transportation, when we are unable to provide transportation with Durham or our own internal shuttles that you might see driving around the district, there's some pretty high costs associated with that. The average cost for neighboring communities when we have to subcontract that is about $65 a round trip, which equates to $11,635 annually. Compare that also to the figure below was for one student alone that we had to transport to and from the Lake Country area for a school year, and that cost $27,000 to subcontract that child's transportation. I did talk with some districts around us. 67% of the 6 districts that I talked to do have extraordinary special education or specialized transportation costs, be it through a 504 or IEP, of their students who are open enrolled that far exceed their revenue that they're getting through open enrollment. 67%. So the next couple of slides that I'm going to get into are, we have used a multi-factor system for determining the amount of service that a student in special education has. And we level that as either a level 1, 2, or 3 based on guidance from DPI, as well as the formula that we have consistently used for the past several years. And so when we look at capacity of our special education students and related service providers to provide services to students, we categorize that as either how much capacity they have for a level 1 student, a level 2 student, a level 3 student. So I just want to give you a picture of how each of those levels are determined in terms of the type of learner that would be considered a level 1, 2, or 3. So what you see on the screen right now is a level 1 student. That would be a student whose needs can primarily be met in regular education with minimal levels of support. Often not a whole lot other than a portion of the FTE of the special ed teacher that costs are associated with that. In a level 2 student, you're going to start to see more support required. Sometimes you might see some aid support for that child, albeit not one-on-one, but some aid support. Oftentimes you're also seeing some additions of either more special ed minutes and or other related service providers starting to be added on to that student. And then a level 3 student is our most complex type of learner. That learner almost always is going to require some specialized one-on-one support from maybe a special education assistant and would have many more special education services and minutes in their IEP. Just to give you a cost idea, to provide one special education assistant, that costs about $27,000 annually. So then that brings us to space. So using the formula that we have consistently previously applied in our district with a slight change that I'll talk about in just a moment, these are the seats that you have available at the different level of service. What we did is we formerly had used an 85% capacity, so we would take the max capacity of a case load for a teacher, which you see those max capacities at 20, 23, and 18. But we then changed that to an 88% for next year's allocation to be consistent with the 3% buffer reduction that the board was considering in regular education.
So I just want to point out, board, we were given direction to use an 8 to 10% buffer. We just went with 9%. So again, Amanda's point being is that because we went from 12% to 9%, we did that 3% factor change as well with the special education seats. So that's what she's referencing.
Thank you. So when then you take that amount of service, you'll see it differentiated between a level 1, 2, and 3. And so then that's changed back into number of students who fit the criteria of either a level 1, 2, or 3 student. at the elementary and secondary. The reason you don't see it by grade level is because our special education teachers work cross-categorically and work across grade levels. So what our principals and special ed teams do at the start of each year, prior to the start of each year, they look at all of the students with disabilities in the school, and then they redistribute caseloads based on severity of needs of the student so that those caseloads can be more equitable. So when you look at that, we would have any combination of those factors. So you wouldn't be able to, for example, have 2 level 3 students at elementary plus 6 level 1. It would be any combination equaling the greatest amount of students. Does that make sense?
And again, just want to clarify here that it's a lottery system. So we, depending on, you know, kids with the severity of their disability, if they even get picked to be in the number of seats that we have, you know, this is the maximum that could happen. We could actually have zero. We could have 0. That is possible to actually have 0. But these are the maximum numbers. The other piece that I want to point out here is that I'm going to have Amanda talk to it a little bit, which is because of the way that the formula works, right now we do not have any seats available for kids that require OT or PT services. Is that correct?
OT and speech.
Okay.
So we are nearly at capacity for physical therapy. So there's one, and OT, PT, and speech don't run on a leveling system such as this per DPI advice. They are run on a number of student per caseload and looking at a moderate amount of service. And so we have one space available in PT, but we don't have any capacity to serve students who need speech or language or occupational therapy for next year.
So the point being is if a student, if they happen to be selected to have one of the seats that are available, and they happen to require OT or speech services, we could not accommodate them. So, you know, again, depending on the luck of the draw and depending on the student's disability, we may not have to accept them if they require those additional services. So I just want to clarify that point as well.
So you wouldn't, at the time, if it was known, but if they were joining our district in the second year, that would manifest. Does that come into play then, or?
Yeah, so the one point that I also want to clarify too is that per DPI regs, we can actually deny a student open enrollment should they require an IEP after they've been accepted.
Okay, thank you.
That's correct.
Yes.
Any other questions?
Are these the number of seats? Are those new seats that are available? Oh, okay.
Yes.
These
So you would have to look at the amount of seats that you have available in general education, and then special ed seats can't ever exceed general education seats, but depending on how many seats the board approves for general education, you would have up to that number of seats in special education.
And we can get to that here shortly.
Okay.
So what we wanted to be able to do was share with you how we got to the special education pieces, and then kind of give you our recommendation as far as based on what we know here is things that we need to further consider, and then what we're recommending as a team. So I guess
I have a question.
Yep.
Amanda, you said earlier in your presentation that 67% of the districts you surveyed who use open enrollment indicated that they did not have a net positive benefit for open enrollment and open enrollees because it was outweighed by their transportation costs.
Let me clarify. So 60% of the districts that I talked to, I had asked the question, do you have the first question was, do you have students with disabilities who you have to provide specialized transportation for under open enrollment? And so the answer to that was yes. And then the second question is, so on those students, then are you expending more on their transportation than you're getting in revenue back for having them through open enrollment? And the answer to that, for that specific population, was yes. I didn't ask overall in terms of their net positive or a net negative on open enrollment funding. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I guess I'd like to know what the list was of districts you contacted.
Sure. So it was I'm not going to give you the district names out of respect for those districts because I didn't ask them, but it was at go ahead.
Nope.
It was at a director's meeting of which I go to every month with Waukesha County and other neighboring county districts with us, but they were Waukesha County districts.
Okay, but just to be clear, I mean, I think I can do that math, that, you know, if we get a kid through open enrollment and then we have to pay substantial transportation costs, like you have indicated here, that would certainly outweigh any benefit, any financial benefit that we would receive. But I don't know that it outweighs all benefits for all open enrollees who may or may not have special education seats. And to clarify, I've clarified with the DPI on a couple of occasions that districts can, and many districts do, set regular ed open enrollment seats, but zero special ed open enrollment seats. That is done frequently, and it is approved by DPI. So just to be clear on that.
So is that an accurate statement? I'm not questioning your statement, but it seems like it's in conflict from what we heard before.
So we actually knew that the board had at least asked that question about, can you set 0 seats? And the fact is, and I want Amanda to kind of speak to that, because she kind of looked at it from the legal point, and we did get some legal guidance on that, that it would be shifting our formula so much that it would actually draw some DPI attention. And so there were a couple of talking points that you got. Sure. Amanda, can you briefly share that?
Sure. So as Ms. Wonderchek has stated, there could be situations where a district's formula and the amount of availability that they have could show that, yes, they have general education seats, but no space capacity in special ed. That's not the case in our district. Using the formula, again, minus that 3% buffer reduction that we stayed consistent with regular ed, that would not be the case in our district under our current formula. So if you were to change our current formula that we've been using, that would be anywhere from a 10 to 18% further reduction in caseload capacity at elementary and secondary. When you do that, DPI then will more scrutinize your formula and have a question on School District of New Berlin. Quite honestly, you didn't have general ed seats for many years. Now you do, and you used to have some special education seats in the past, but now you don't. So they look at your formula. So it would be unclear on whether or not they would hold, whether appeals would go into our favor when they more scrutinize our formula if we're changing it that dramatically from what it was currently. The other thing that we'd have to consider in doing that is the amount of appeals and litigation that we could also be subject to. For example, groups like the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, they, back in 2015, started really looking closely at districts who changed their formula to limit special education seat availability. And though in some of the cases the districts prevailed, it did take a lot of time and money for that litigation. Another consideration for the board is the statement it makes to our current families. When we say that we have 0 availability in special education, it may cause some of our resident families to question the adequate level of service we could provide our existing students if we're that at capacity. And so, again, it's really about that scrutiny level and whether or not the board can justify that level of change.
It does seem to me strange that you went into great detail about talking about how we don't have any places for kids to get PT, OT, or maybe one spot for PT, OT, and speech. When my experience with special ed, both with my own son and with other kids, his peer groups at his school, is that most of those kids get those services. And in order to qualify and have seats for those kids and to give them all the tools that they will need to meet their minutes under their IEPs that they're federally required to meet, it's surprising to me that any seats would be available. How do you justify that?
Sure, so you look at them differently, and because not all students who would be a level 1, 2, or 3 would have that level of related service.
But they need some minutes,
so
in all likelihood.
Sure, so the level 1, 2, and 3 that you see here is just cross-categorical special education. So the caseload factoring that you have to do for OT, PT, and speech is a different formula that they use compared to this. So when you look at both, for certain related services, we don't have capacity, but when you look at special education service by a special education teacher, not one of those related service providers, that's the amount of service we have available under our current formula.
Okay, and can you direct me to where the current formula is? Because as a sitting school board member, I don't know where it is.
Sure, so that has always been provided to the board in the board packet during this open enrollment time in terms of, so this is the multi-factors that we look at.
Is
and
it
then
in the policy, Amanda? Or where is it?
No, so the policy states that we have to have a formula that we use to determine space availability.
That's why I didn't see it there.
Correct. So it's not in the policy. It's in practice in terms of what we've done. Dave Funk, our former director, used a very similar, if not the same, process. And so it's the process and the formula that I have been used to calculating for the district for the last 6 years.
Okay. And maybe, Joe, you can help us through where that calculation is, because again, I don't know. I don't know if all the other board members know what we're talking about as far as the calculation, because I sure don't. And I'm willing to say that, but I need to I feel like I need to understand that better, you know, so.
I guess if we could just finalize the presentation.
Sure, sorry.
And then we'll get to questions, and then obviously provide our recommendation too, just so that we can.
Could I get one quick question on those numbers we were looking at for the level 1, 2, and 3? Is that saying we currently have those teachers available right now that do not have a workload?
Can you clarify? Can you restate your question?
Can you go back to the 1, 2, and 3 levels? So, sorry, the after the third. Yeah, there we go. So is this saying that we have staff right now it's saying we're not at capacity today? So if we allowed special education seats that would fill these seats, we have teachers that we would not have to add additional staff that could manage those kids' needs?
So these numbers look at what your enrollment is for next year.
You need to get it to the microphone.
Oh, sorry. These numbers look at your projections for next year, rolling out anticipated graduates and incoming from EC, early childhood students, into kindergarten. So it doesn't take into account any move-in students. So it's not based on now capacity, it's based on FTE now compared to students for next year.
But looking at this, if we filled these additional resources, we wouldn't be spending any more money. We already have that staff today.
Correct.
Is that a fair assessment? Okay, that's what I was just trying to understand. I didn't know if there was a.
Yeah, but just keep in mind, there's that risk factor, right? You don't know what you get until you get.
That's also correct.
I want to just kind of briefly kind of go over that when the teaching and learning department was kind of looking at the data that we wanted to share with you, there's a lot of pieces that we just are unable to put a specific, like, this is exactly how this is going to go. And so it's still very difficult for us to even talk about cost. What's your cost savings? Will your cost output be? Because it will depend on the students that we are accepting. Also, we do allow a lot of inter-district transfers for our own students. So if our students have daycare on the other side of town, usually Joe is able to say, sure, you can go to Reagan because we have a seat available in a class at Reagan. We don't have to hire another teacher, yada, 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 right? But that could impact our ability to allow for our own families to inter-district transfer based on family need and specific daycare issues. Also, like Amanda was talking about, there are appeal risks and litigations. Chrissy kind of shared that with you at one of our last board meetings. Those are things that are unknowns. But with all of that being said,
we get to ultimately the recommendation. So based on the information that you heard tonight regarding success on ACT measures, college remediation, GPA, credit deficiencies, ultimately the recommendation is going to be for the open enrollment seats to open to really be more at the primary grades, so grades K, 1, 2, and 3, and those looking at a preference given to currently attending students and siblings of currently attending students. So on the slide you can see, based on numbers that we have right now, we're looking at about a total of 29 open enrollment seats at those grades as of today.
So what we've been able to do is, based on the feedback we got from the board at the last meeting, we used between the 8 to 10% buffer for regular ed seats. So we used a 9% buffer. And the board said, bring us seats between 25 and 40. And as of today, we are at 29 seats that, and again, based on the recommendation, in mitigating our potential fallout, but again, it's too difficult to tell what it could be. This is what we would recommend that would be in the best interest of the district with the data that we have. Certainly, if the board wants to get it to a 0 seat we would need that directive. That is not our recommendation. But at the same time, if the board is asking us to bring in the zero seats, we'll be happy to do that at the board's request. But it is not our recommendation to do that.
So this recommendation is for regular ed seats? And
Yes.
then we would follow special ed seats, 29 special ed seats, or however many. No.
Yeah, based on that, the can you go back to
into
that
the
box, Royce?
29.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So these would be included in those grades, those K1, 2, and 3 grades, where the open enrollment seats that we'd be opening would be in those grade levels. Some of those would be open to special education students.
So we would, because we have not, based on the formula that we provided on our recommendation, we wouldn't look at any seats available at the secondary because we wouldn't have any seats available there. And so now you're really only looking at the elementary seats. And again, back to Janet's point, this is a worst case scenario. But again, we would like a directive from the board should you want to deviate from the recommendation of being consistent with, and again, if you recall the last time, we went from 12% to 5%, and the board had suggested that was a pretty significant deviation from our current standard. And so that's why the board suggested 8 to 10%. We came in at 9%. That's why we're also recommending the same thing based on that feedback from the board, is we went from 85% to 88% capacity, so it's a 3% deviation consistent with that of what we did with the regular ed seats. But again, if you want us to go further with just special education, we can certainly do that, but not in our recommendation, and we would need a board directive to do so.
Can you explain this part about preference given to students currently attending? Because I thought we didn't have any open enrollment students.
So preference for students that are currently attending right now on a tuition waiver. So we have students that are currently in the district right now on tuition waiver. So preference meaning that they would receive preference once their tuition waiver expires, they would be given preference for open enrollment seating.
So let me just explain, Kate. Assume you were to leave the district today with your son, and you go to Muskego, but yet you wanted your son to actually continue his education here. Based on the regulations via a tuition waiver, you could actually keep your son here next school year after a certain date.
Correct. If we move today, it would get you through this current school year.
But in some cases, if it's a little bit later in the school year, we could have them actually stay throughout the following school year. So regardless of whether we have seats or not, that's part of the regulations from DPI. And again, so point being is there is actually, we could keep some of the kids that we already have here.
Right.
Is the other thing with this. So of those 29 kids, and Diana, can you just share briefly of the families that are tuition waiver eligible, how many of them would be interested in continuing their students here at the elementary level?
Well, let me first say, of the 16 that are currently tuition waivered, only 7 fall in that K through 3 grade level.
But that's still 7 of our own kids that would be staying here.
And then
that would get preference.
And when I initially sent out requests to parents, that was for 12 students, and of those 12 students, parents replied, of 8 students, if that they would continue on here. But one of those families does have an older child, so that may change that for 2 of those students.
I noticed in the presentation that you guys have gone to great pains to sort of dig through the data on the remediation factors for getting kids later. We as a board have had sort of an ongoing discussion the last several months about, well, could we, fit some kids in at the secondary, and could we, do those types of things? So I think that, and I know, Mitch, you've been particularly vocal about that and sort of wanting to explore that. I sort of have always been of the opinion that I from the research that I read, not what's been presented tonight, but from the research that I've read in districts, as a broad category, the earlier a district gets a kid, probably the more likely the success is with that particular kid. because they're educated in the cultural ethos of that district and the things that are important and the measures that we use are consistent then. So I guess I have a personal bias toward getting kids earlier in their educational careers. But I know that, we've talked about that, and I don't want to have a closed mind to the alternative either. So I guess I'm asking for input from other board members on, what we should as a board consider, because, this is a big deal. We're potentially going to affect, how kids are educated, and that's one of the most important things that they do in their lives. So I think it's important to get it right. So I guess we need to really think about how we do this if we're going to do it. So I asked for the question. So.
I'm thinking in regards to that, will or may have to reapply. I think, was it at 7th grade? So how would that fit into here if we're only taking open enrollment from K to
So it
third
wouldn't
grade?
really impact anybody for at least 3 years.
So basically then, we wouldn't let them reapply because we don't have any secondary openings.
That student population, though, would move up that time. So like the 284 kindergarten seats or whatever, or however that works, that would move up each time. So that would move like the kindergarten. So we potentially would have open enrollment seats.
So then it would move with them as they.
Yeah, because
okay.
that's that grade.
Okay.
Yep.
Everyone's looking at me. Yeah, I mean, I was vocal on it before, too. I just feel like we've talked before about not knowing what we're going to get at those lower grades. Kindergarten, I think, is tough to project. You guys get students added probably the day of. You guys don't get applications. So the younger, I don't disagree with the logic that the younger the better. We've got more time to mold them. But I do feel like if we just take the younger kids and we don't look at a couple in the higher grades, that we don't really get the full experience of this, and we can't. If this is a success or a failure in the early grades, we don't know if it's a success or a failure in the older grades. So I'd like to try a couple in the older grades and see how we can squeeze this formula to make that work. I don't want to bring 30 kids in those higher grades, but I'd like to see at maybe 10th and 11th grade if we could bring in a few students there as well.
But I think maybe, judging from what you just said, Mitch, I think maybe we could address that by dealing with Janet's point, which is to, I know that that it's been proposed to change the policy so that they have to reapply for 7th grade. But I think in order to know whether this program is a success or not, we have to follow it for all 13 years or all 12 years or all 11 years. That's how we're going to know if it's a success or not. I don't know that we gain all that much information from saying, okay, we'll try to get some kids at 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, because of the fact that I don't know that we have them long enough to, do you know what I mean, to really sort of give them our outstanding educational product. And I'm not sure that it's not as much of a detriment to them if we, force them into not being able to meet benchmarks and not be successful. And that also causes damage to kids, and I don't want to be part of that.
So the numbers we looked at are students that moved here from another school district. Their families picked up and moved here.
Actually, I have a question on that. Does that also include students that come from the private schools and move in like at 7th and 12th, 7th and 9th grade?
When we looked at the students who came here since kindergarten, it did. The students 10 through 12, there was only a few who came here from like Catholic Memorial or Pius or DSHA between 10th and 12th. Most of those students' transition points are at 7th and 9th grade. 9th grade was really hard to include because they didn't have GPAs and many of them didn't have ACTs or credit deficiencies yet because they don't get credits coming to us with a transcript. So that's why you saw 10th through 12th grade.
It's a very different group than open enrollment, where they're still living in West Dallas or Racine or Milwaukee or wherever they're living, and their parents, as we talked about before. That is a huge commitment to drive your kid 20 minutes, 40 minutes round or each way, twice a day, every single day. You're not getting a parent that's just saying, maybe I'll send my kid 40 minutes away. They're driving them every day. That's a big commitment that parent has.
And you also have to recall, one of the slides that we mentioned was a lot of the opportunities that we offer here may not be offered at other districts, and so therefore they would be taking advantage of them, which is what we would want, but it's going to come with dollars attached to it.
In terms of like shop classes and stuff, or
Nope,
WCTC stuff?
All of it.
So we looked before at the costs, and I think it was $190,000 to $240,000 in special ed costs. So doing the math right here, if we had 29 kids, it was $225,000. So if that, I mean, that's what we spent on special education. If we had. Oh, I'm sorry, that was, okay. I thought I clarified on that.
I've been a big proponent of open enrollment for a long time. I think that my preference and the presentation that Amy and I offered last February was contemplating more like 75 seats. But in the name of moving things forward and hoping to take the boogeyman out of open enrollment, I would very much approve of 29 seats. I think that'd be a reasonable place to start. I think that it gives us an opportunity to see how this goes. And by see how this goes, I mean investing in those 29 kids to the point where we're getting them early. We hope to increase and augment their educational experience to a much more positive degree than wherever they're coming from. And I think we do have to stick with them. This is not a short-term deal. And I think that 29 seats, I would be happy with it because I think that I'm happy to meet in the middle on what I had initially suggested. So that's how I feel about it.
Real quick, if the student reapplies at 7th grade and gets rejected, do we then open up another seat for another student to come in, or that seat's just closed and we're down to 28 students if they all continue through?
It depends on how it's prorated out.
Okay.
But wouldn't kids who had attended like K through 6, who applied for open enrollment, as long as we still had open enrollment seats available, they would get preference, correct?
Correct.
Which is what we want, because we want to keep them if their parents are still willing to get them.
Yeah, again, that's,
Right.
Of these 29 seats that we're even looking at, I mean, not everybody's coming in from the outside.
Sure.
So,
Sure.
and again, it's, I think that's actually even better, that consistency for those families and those kids, I think is great. And again, just to clarify, your policy already states the preferential piece. So you really wouldn't have to change anything. And back to, Janet's point, we don't even have to change the policy right now because it's not going to impact anybody for 3 years. I just wanted to have it on here as a first read, just to allow you to have the second read opportunity at the next meeting.
I'm just going to touch on the financial portion of this, because you keep using word investing into kids, and we do invest into our kids. We invest in the kids that live here. Now we're investing in kids that don't go here. And the way I'm going to kind of sum it up is basically, if I take out a mortgage for $1,000 and I get $500 back, I have a $500 deficiency. Now, you're asking everybody, because right now, for the last 3 years, we've been talking about the financial state that this board is in and the school district is in, and we've been trying to cut this, that, and the other thing to make it stable. The advent of taking your presentation from last year, which had 72 kids and a zero cost factor, has been my biggest block in my head, because financially, having a $1,000 debt and a $500 input leaves me short $500. And we're asking all the members of this community to fund up anything extra that might come up. And this is a huge unknown. And the huge unknown is they're finally presenting some basic numbers of this is going to cost us something. And I said before that at best this is going to be a wash. Now, is it benefiting all the kids in our district now? Or are we going to have to start pulling more resources from someplace else to start educating kids from other districts that we're not getting the financial benefit from? My biggest beef is not the open enrollment. I like the idea of open enrollment and helping and doing this, but I think financially we're not in a place to take a gamble with money that we don't have when we're trying to make massive cuts. We're eliminating coaches, we're limiting other aspects and resources for the current students to bring more in, with a possibility of this costing us far more than what we're actually going to be getting for it. And it's not that I'm not for open enrollment. I don't think open enrollment at this time in our financial state is probably the smartest thing in the world to do, because there are costs to this. There's no way that you can look at this and say that there isn't going to be some sort of a financial thing. And I've always contended, even at a wash, we're still in a financial state where we're trying to pinch pennies and trying to cut everything that we can, every single meeting that we have. I think that is just being completely overlooked. And the argument that we keep getting regarding that you don't believe that these numbers exist, they exist. I've been in business far too long, for so many years, to say that I can't do something that there's not going to be any cost for this. There's going to be a cost, and at best it's a wash.
So what is your projection for costs?
My projection for cost was it would be maybe even, or we probably, if we're at best, a 10% loss.
What is your basis for that, though? I mean,
My basis is, one, because we don't, like I said before, we don't know what the assistance, the time that our teachers have to take, all the extra classes that they have to do, all the resources that we have to bring in. We don't know those costs. We do know that what our cost is per student now, and we know that what we get is less. And the proposals of saying that.
but you're taking fixed resources. This building, if you add 50 more kids to this building doesn't cost us anymore.
Well, that's the fixed resource, but the resource that we're having are teachers, assistants, the time that they take, the extra resources in classes.
So that's what I'm asking is, what is your projection that, how many teachers do you think we're going to have to add because of this? I think everyone that's in support of this has agreed there's going to be some cost. We don't know what it is. We might have to add a teacher. We might have.
Yeah, I know, but it's been argued that the reason why we're doing this is because we want to fill seats and we think that we're going to bring the district more money. The argument is it's to bring more money, because we're talking about either consolidation, but let's fill the seats. But filling the seats and costing the district more money doesn't make any sense. And I'm just saying that at this time. I'm not saying for the future. I'm saying at this time, while we're struggling to figure out how to give people raises and where we have to cut this budget or cut that budget in a system that we already have, that we're desperately fighting every single week to provide for, adding in a massive unknown at this particular time is probably not most financially prudent.
What we will be doing.
We're building in a 9% buffer. So, I mean, the cost would be another teacher, special education programs outside of the district, special education teachers inside of the district,
Transportation costs, I mean.
the only transportation cost we'd have is if someone has an IEP. There's no additional transportation costs. Or
Or homeless.
No, so I'm a no at this time. Just because I think financially, we're, every single meeting that has gone on ad infinitum, the additional committees to figure out what our finances are gonna be, to add in something that we don't know at this particular time, that are not investing into the current students that are here, because we're taking away from the current students' education currently.
Well, we did a solar project. We've done a lot of things that we don't know the financial impact.
Well, the solar project makes us
That was
money.
all.
The reason why we did that is a solar project that actually brings in
It's pure upside.
a
Not
lot of
necessarily.
money every single
Yeah, it
year,
is.
which we didn't have before.
It's
That's not the
guaranteed
same.
pay.
But we don't know if those degrade over time and we're stuck with them for 30 years in our building and we're getting $50 a year and we have all this space taken up. If we have to take them off to replace our roofs, there's an unknown. There's an unknown in every single thing we're gonna do.
Well,
There's no doubt about that.
All right. So I guess our vote would come next meeting. I do think that we do need to discuss the budget projections. I think there is an impact potentially on, to decide if this is the best time to do that. I think what they need now, though, is to understand how many seats are we bringing next meeting to do the final vote. And I would be comfortable with what is presented tonight.
Just really quick, well, no one's surprised, right? Zero. Just feel like I need to speak, but my quick question for Patrick is, given this, what number were you putting in the budget? Were you leaving it flat? Were you expecting an increase in revenue because of this, or how were you looking at this from a financial perspective?
So
Before I answer that, I'm going to defer to the superintendent.
Yeah, so the great part about it is, that's something that we're hoping you would ask and have input on. So while I think Patrick is going to have a suggestion, with basically this is the best case scenario. As Kelly mentioned, it is extremely difficult to cost it because what Mitch just said, we don't know what the costs are going to be. And so that is something actually we're going to need some direction from the board about what should we be anticipating. I do know that when we met with WASB this summer, the gentleman that facilitated our work, he said budget net neutral, but is that something that this board wants to do? I don't know. So, but that's a great point, and that is something that Patrick will be working through. And then just, based on feedback I did receive from the board, we do have time, so we plan on bringing you a 5-year forecast no later than June, certainly. We actually have a proposal here for you tonight as a starting point, but there are going to be continued conversations around, for example, you received an enrollment report, but which of those projections do you want us to use in our forecast model? Same thing with open enrollment. Again, this conversation of it's very difficult to cost. We can make our assumptions, but what is the assumptions the board would like us to use? And so while we hope to actually have a finalized 5-year projection sooner than June, and then also note that that's a volatile piece as well. For example, right now we're still waiting on the third Friday counts from January. We have those reports that'll be solidified prior to the next meeting, but again, right now we don't know what those numbers are. They've been pretty stable and static in previous years, but that could have possibly changed. So that actually was a great segue, Susan, to the next presentation. And so really just seeking feedback to solidify open enrollment. Again, we are recommending, for many of the same reasons that some of the board members mentioned, that we would have seats at the elementary as mentioned, and that we would not deviate any further than the 3% for the spec ed seats than we had. Again, we can certainly bring that number to 0 if you so choose. We would not recommend doing so, and we would need that direction prior to the next meeting so that we could have that prepared for you, if that's the direction the board would want to go.
So, Joe, just one question.
Yeah.
Based on what you just said.
Yes.
So the administration is recommending that we have 29 open enrollment seats. Of those 29, 3% of those seats would be special ed seats.
No, it would be the numbers that, again, were in that previous slide.
Okay.
And
I totally got lost on that. So.
It would only be the elementary numbers.
Okay.
And again, this would be worst case scenario.
That's assuming that all the maximum number of students would apply. And those would be the first people on that list.
Correct. Correct.
First numbers drawn.
Yeah, that's assuming every first number drawn would meet that level 1, 2, and 3 support.
Okay.
If they need a level 2, how does that work exactly? If they need a level 2 support, well, I guess it's all cumulative, you mentioned before.
Yeah. Yep.
If it's 1 or 2, they don't get
Right. Correct.
Okay.
And again, the nice part about it is we ultimately can control literally up until the day before school starts of where those kids will be. So, we're not going to necessarily say, hey, this is where you're going to be. This is where we project you're going to be. Mm-hmm. But, if things change, we're going to do the best interest of the district, not only financially, but also for that family too, so that we're making sure we're putting them in the right spot with the right resources and not just plugging them in somewhere where we're not going to be able to meet their needs.
Thank you.
Yep.
The only last comment I want to make is that Jeff is right. We've had a lot of meetings about our budget, our problems in our budget, how to solve the problems in our budget, things we need to cut out of our budget to solve our budget problems. Yes, we have definitely had a lot of those meetings. The two major drivers of our deficit are our debt and our decreasing enrollment. We have refinanced the debt to the greatest extent we can with some of Patrick's help, and that's been positive. The other major driver of our our deficit is our decreasing enrollment. It seems to me an very uncomplicated calculus that if you have decreasing enrollment and you have more seats, you may want to make some of those seats available to other people. That's uncomplicated. And when I had proposed 72 seats, I thought that was a small number. 29 is smaller. I had a good public school education. So I'm saying I think that this is a good compromise. I'm just saying. And you're welcome. So I think that this is a good opportunity. I think it's a good opportunity for us to try something that I guess is not as as bold as what I had hoped, but I think that this is a good compromise, and I am all about compromising so that we can move forward together. And I think that, again, we address some of the issues with our debt. We need to address this other major driver of our deficit, and this is enrollment. Decreasing enrollment is one of those, so I'm in support of that.
I think just to add to that confusion, there are actually two things that you can do when your enrollment is reducing. It's not just filling more of those seats. You can also do the other side of that, and that's reduce the FTE of the staff. And I actually, that is another way that districts work with declining enrollments. Instead of adding open enrollment, they reduce the teaching FTE that they're able to do within those numbers.
And there's also building consolidation, right? So at the end of the day, reduce your footprint. Because you're saying we have those seats, but it's because we have building seats, right? So I'm just throwing that out. The only concern I have with this conversation, because we have very differing of views, which is great, right? Because our community does as well. But without knowing what is going to be represented in the budget, I don't think anyone can say this is a good thing or a bad thing. So I think the budget discussion has to take place before the number of seats, because otherwise what I'm hearing is it should be budget neutral from some, and others are saying, nope, we should recognize the revenue as a way to fill our gap. Can't do it both ways, right? So we need to land on that first from my perspective.
Yeah, and that's why I think, we'll vote on the actual seats next week. But we would need to know, well, I guess, just of what the seats are going to be.
If this proposal's okay, or do we want to change it?
Yeah, and like I said, I'm good with it. Kate, what are your
I am
feelings?
also good with this proposal.
Okay, and Janet?
I'm good with it, although I did originally think that it would be good to open it up to upper grades, but the sense of compromising and the presentations that were given, I'd be okay with this recommendation.
Can I just ask a quick question? For those of you that are good with it, are you good with it at a 0 revenue gain, or are you good with it only if there's dollars attached to it in the budget?
I'm good with it if it's a 0 revenue gain, because my major reason that I'm in favor of open enrollment is for parent choice. And then second would be, if it would help revenue, that would be great. That's a nice plus. But even if it doesn't, I still think that it's good to have open enrollment for parent choice, as was intended, the reason we have open enrollment available.
So can those are the others?
Yeah, I agree with Janet that I would budget it as a 0 and net neutral. I wouldn't, and then anything that we would get in addition, if we would get additional revenue, should go towards any building or needs like that. But I wouldn't put it in the budget.
I'm also in support of this, of course, with the caveat that we add high school. I know I'm the only one up here saying that, so I will be quiet now. And I do second Janet's opinion on giving parents choice, as well as, I do think it'll be revenue positive, net positive for us, but I'm okay. I mean, we're talking about $200,000. So if we're $50,000 plus, or it's not a huge dollar amount in our budget.
My problem is strictly 100% financial. I mean, I appreciate what we can give, and parents should have choices, but we haven't been able to put money away. We haven't been able to do anything on our buildings, and we've suspended so many budgets in this thing that if it is anything other than completely neutral, I'm completely 100% against it, because we are literally trying and paying out of a savings account to make our budget work. And this is the first year that we've gotten to a place where we did have a balanced budget through many, 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 many sacrifices. So if this isn't budget neutral, or it doesn't make us money, I'm completely against it, just at this time.
If after a few years this does make us money, are you on board for opening more seats?
I would be, yes.
Okay.
That's why I said this time, because right now, Andy has been going without a budget for maintenance, and talking about, we put something on our building that's making this money that hopefully will help supply that, because we've had no money. And we cut coaches, and we cut everything else. So if this, I don't see we have an extra $200,000, even if it costs us $200,000, because we don't have an
we added 2 full-time teachers at $100,000 a year,
My statement stands. Doesn't matter who I add, it's gotta be completely net neutral. I can't add anybody, I don't wanna add anybody, that's not the point. The point is we're taking away from current students that live here in the district that everybody's paying for. And because it's literally 100% monetary. I don't want anybody to think anything else that I'm against students or even this program. I'm completely against it because we have been fighting for this budget and we've been freezing everything. Everybody's feeling the pinch and everybody's feeling the pain. And if this comes in where it costs us even a single penny, it's not worth it because of how much we've had to cut from other places. It means we have to find money in our budget for a program when we're cutting programs currently. That's all.
To Susan's question, I support the proposal. I think it's conservative and prudent to keep it in the budget as being neutral, having a neutral effect, because I think that then we're not counting on it making revenue. I was the treasurer of my church for 15 years, and in that every annual budget I prepared for them, I gave them the worst case scenario because we never knew what was coming the next year. And under that philosophy, I think here too, we need to be prudent and conservative. And I wouldn't expect to want Patrick to put in our budget that we're going to make $200,000, but I think it's going to be net positive. That's where I think we're going to land, and that is a big reason why I'm in favor of it. I also think it's good for the community. I think it's good for our kids to be exposed to people who don't necessarily live in our community. I think that's good for them. I think it's good for us to all learn from each other as a community. And I do believe we have an outstanding educational product. All we had to do was listen to the Ike staff about just the Ike accolades that they talked about tonight. We have a tremendous product to share with this community, and I say we share it.
So just as a point of clarification, our plan is to not bring forth anything different at the next school board meeting. We will bring forth the numbers as they have been presented. And we will not deviate from the special education numbers that we've provided. And that we will not be recommending any policy changes at the next meeting. But what we will do is we'll leave the second read on there as to just leave it on there just in case something comes up, to allow you that opportunity as a board. But we would expect no recommended changes to the policy as well.
Can I just say, Mr. Garza, if, with the understanding that there are no changes warranted with the second Friday in January count?
Correct. So I think either way, we're going to try and get we're going to try and get to where we are today with the numbers that, depending on where the numbers are, assuming that things won't be significantly different. And then that also, and again, I think it's been great discussion around what we should be allocating for our forecast as well. I think that was a great point of clarification for us that Patrick can take into consideration. For the most part, I think we were hearing net neutral in our projections. That is something that, again, we'll have Patrick kind of touch base on here in the next item. But again, we'll be bringing forth what we brought forth today as presented.
Could I give you ladies one more task after this incredible presentation you put together? I'm sorry. Can you put together some numbers on attendance from these students as well as the general population of non-ed? Just curious to see another metric on that. Thanks.
All right, we're moving on to item C, the discussion of budget projections.
Thank you. So what you have been given in your packet is a draft of the Fund 10 General Fund projection summary. And just as, I think, more important than the colorful graphs if you're looking online, or is to look at the gray box below what are the spreadsheets and the graphs to see what the assumptions I am using at this point in time to create this projection. If you look at the graphs, you'll notice that we have a slight budget surplus in fiscal year 2020 and a slight surplus in fiscal year 2021. and at that point in time, it starts to drop off slightly, then dramatically, and then significantly in fiscal 2024. The reason for that is the way those assumptions are put into this type of a projection. And Crislin, I'm happy that you talked about, you know, budgeting conservatively, and that is one of the things that that we do, or that I'm doing when I'm putting this projection together. So taking a look at the assumptions, there are assumptions that we control, there are assumptions that we somewhat control, and there are assumptions that are out of our control. I'll explain each one of those by using the examples that are in, that are the bullets under each of those. The assumptions that we control, for example, salaries. We have the ability to set salaries. There is some guidance given by the WERC with the annual CPI for contracts that begin on the 1st of July. That right now is trending at about 1.8%. So what I have put into the assumptions in building this draft projection, this initial projection, is 2.5%. Now you may ask, why would I budget 2.5% if right now it's currently trending at 1.8? Is because that's exactly what it is. It's a trend. And so I can budget 1.8% and get to July and say, well, the CPIU came in at 1.9 or 2.1, and that can modestly blow up our budget, although when you're talking about salaries, our single largest dollar amount, a 0.5% change in that assumption is a significant amount of dollars. So I would rather budget conservatively and drop that back as opposed to being aggressive with that and having to increase that. Purchase services. Purchase services are anything that we budget to pay another company or another vendor to do for us because we don't do it ourselves. The largest item in purchase services is transportation. That transportation I'm budgeting at 13% because that's the maximum that we have under our contract with Durham right now. It can come in less, but I don't want to budget 10% and have them come in at 13 because of increased fuel costs or their own increased salaries and benefits. So because transportation, though, is only a portion of purchase services, that allows us to turn that 13% into a 3 to 5% increase. I am also recommending no increases in our non-capital, in our capital expenses. That's the stuff that we purchase. So essentially I'm recommending, or I'm building this off of freezing our budgets on going out and purchasing anything new. That doesn't mean that that's what's going to happen, but conservatively speaking, that I think is the most prudent way to build this budget. When I build budgets, when I do my job, my goal is to be more efficient in doing the same things that we do year after year so that we have more money to do more. Okay? So by budgeting conservatively, I'm hopefully building in that ability for us to be able to sustain the additions that we want to bring to our district as opposed to reductions.
Patrick, as a point of clarification, when you say freeze, you're not suggesting eliminating because we do have allocated dollars for resources, but it just would not increase.
Correct.
So I just want to clarify there to you, Kelly, and the administration and staff or others that are here. It doesn't mean that we're eliminating all funding for anything.
Correct.
It's just we're not increasing funding beyond what we've currently allocated for resources.
Correct. And again, the key word in here is the word projection. So as this is developed, those expenditures are developed as well. The next one, and this is a very important item that we just finished talking about, were the open enrollment seats. I'm very happy to hear the board say, go ahead and budget for these open enrollment seats, but don't put that as just additional revenue. So, you know, and I'm very happy to do that, and that's exactly the kind of direction that I need, because it would be easy for me to come back and say, well, I'm going to budget the revenue, but I'm not going to budget any additional expense, and come back and have $100,000 in additional expense and have people say, well, you told us we were going to make $225,000. Where did that extra $100,000 go? So by essentially what I'll do then is I'll budget $200 plus thousand in revenue, but I'll add $200 plus $1,000 a corresponding expense so that we're projecting neutral, and then we benefit from anything that is more positive. Enrollment projection model, and this is an important thing that I want your direction from. We just had an enrollment projection done by Applied Population Labs. In that, we were given a baseline projection, and then we were given 3 other projections. And so part of it is selfish in creating, as you get more detailed in creating these projections, they get very busy, and the more scenarios that you do for each one of those budget or those enrollment projections, I have to run a full set of scenarios on those. So let's say we run 5 different scenarios, but now you also want a scenario for each one of those enrollment projections. So now I'm going to be up to 20 scenarios. The more of those I add, the more difficult it's going to be to say, I think this is the best one for us to go forward. So I think it would be beneficial for me to hear from you, out of those 4 scenarios, the base and the 3 projections, which of those do you think I should use in establishing my scenarios? Does that make sense? I think you should take a look at those, and, you know, again, when I start to develop these scenarios, I'm going to say, what would you like me to budget for enrollment? Give me that direction so that we're not getting to July and saying, you know, well, you told us this and now we have that. Give me some idea of what you want me to put together for your purposes. So those are the assumptions that we control: salary, expenses, some of the expenses, open enrollment seats, and enrollment projection model that we're going to use. We also have some control over benefits and insurance and special ed, the special ed transfer that we transfer from the general fund to support the education or the cost of educating students with disabilities. Benefits like WRS, our retirement, is directly connected to what our salaries are. So we somewhat have control over that because we control our salary increases. Where we don't have control over that is the WRS contribution is set by the ETF. It's set by the governing body that controls the pension. So we kind of have some control, but we also have some things out of our control. Insurance is the same thing. Because we are self-insured, we have more control over our insurance costs than, say, a fully insured district. That being said, we also have to manage our utilization. So if we have one of our plans that's trending above 100% utilization, we have to make adjustments to be able to compensate for that. Okay, so we do set those rates because we are our own insurance company, but we still have to be able to keep an adequate amount of reserves to cover potential losses. Special education transfer, one of the things that we have to be mindful of in special education is the concept of maintenance of effort. So while we can control somewhat the amount of money that we take out of our general fund to support the cost of students with disabilities, the only way that we can reduce that amount is if we have certain reductions, like students, we lose students that have expensive services, or if we have an educator that leaves the district, and let's say they were a very experienced educator, and we replace that educator with a newer person that has less experience and less salary and benefits. We can reduce that amount of that transfer by amounts equal to that. So we kind of have control over it, but we still have regulations that we have to abide by while we're making those changes. The last thing are assumptions that are out of our control. And I'm going to start from the bottom up. Categorical aid and revenue limit. Those are both things that are set by the state budget. And those are completely out of our control, and those are huge wild cards, okay? So right now, the revenue limit is, for next year will be $179 per student that we are allowed to increase our revenue, okay? If we, and given the climate in Madison, if that reduces from let's just say it's $180 down to $100, that is $350,000 in revenue that we are going to lose. So, and it's completely out of our control. The only thing that we can do is make a corresponding adjustment in our expenses to cover for that. We cannot change that revenue increase. Similarly, there's categorical aid. That's $742 per student. Right now, that's in state statute. Normally, once that categorical aid has been established, the state has not taken it away. In the last biennial budget of Governor Walker, he actually was proposing a reduction in categorical aid at the end of his last biennial budget. That was reversed by Governor Evers in the current legislature, but there can be legislative action that reduces that amount, and we are completely out of control of that. The only thing that we can do is make corresponding adjustments in expenses to compensate for that. Finally, there are some insurances that are, again, completely out of our control, and that's our risk insurance. This is one of the things that I've been working on lately, and I'm very concerned about because not only is it out of our control locally in Wisconsin, but one of the types of insurance, our property insurance, is being impacted by natural disasters across the country and essentially across the globe, because all of those property insurance is controlled by the small amount that you invest or that you pay to put into the risk pool, and then there's a reinsurance risk pool that right now is getting hit globally by all of the natural disasters. And so districts that don't have terrible risk history are still seeing 15 to 20% increases in their insurance cost without their risk being high at all. And so the only thing that you can do is go to market, and going to market, I just had a conversation with our consultant today. Districts that are going to market are actually not seeing the savings that balances what it costs for them to go to market. And so, these are things that are out of our control. And I'll stop there and see if there's any questions before we.
What type of cost is involved with going to market? I mean, I used to work for an insurance broker. I don't recall there being a cost to our customers to go to market.
Well, we had to pay your salary. And so when we go to market, there's an hourly cost to work with our consultant, to put the marketing packets together, to send the marketing packets out, to receive the marketing packets, and, put the comparisons together. And so there is a cost to go to market.
So your insurance consultants in this case are not working on a commission basis, they're working on a fee basis?
Correct.
That's what you're saying, okay.
And then, Patrick, you had mentioned earlier in your presentation that you wanted direction from the board on what enrollment projection we wanted you to utilize. And I looked back at the form that was presented at the November 11th meeting for all the board members, so we can go home and do our homework and be prepared for the next meeting. It looks like there were 4 possible models that she used: the baseline model, the 5-year trend model, the 2-year trend model, and the kindergarten model. So my question is, I'm going to go home and look at this more closely and see what I think, but I don't work in education as my primary job. You do. So in your former district and in your former life as a business manager for somebody else, what did you recommend, and is it different than what you would recommend here?
My recommendation is, if we are going to use, I did not use the modeling that we got through Applied Population Lab. We looked at those as guidance, but then we would look at the long-term trends between the September count and the January count, and what we could estimate. So my recommendation here would be that we look at the most conservative model that Applied Population Lab gave us. The most conservative, I think, is the kindergarten trend, while the baseline trend is the most. And that's essentially, the baseline trend is taking the longest period of time. I believe it's a 10-year average. And in our 10-year average, we have 7 years of declining enrollment. And so that's really, in my mind, that's going to throw that projection way too conservative, because we're including all of those years of declining enrollment. And that's where I would look at the kindergarten method as being the most conservative, roughly 95 seats increase over the next 5 years. One of the things that I wouldn't do is go beyond the 5 years in that model.
Well, and I think that she said when she presented to us that if you go beyond 5 years, the data gets skewed and you really don't get reliable data anyway, if I remember correctly.
Yep, that is exactly what she said, and I'm very glad that Sarah said that.
Our goal at the next board meeting is to actually have some mini presentations related to the enrollment study, for example. So yes, you can do your homework, but then we will also kind of give you a little quiz when you no, we won't. But but we will, kind of bring you this, this more detailed information around things like the enrollment, so that you're kind of making an educated decision on, okay, this is Patrick's recommendation, but are you in agreement with that? And then as, some of these other numbers as far as, our projections around the categorical aid revenue limit, hopefully Patrick will have more detail around the risk insurance as well. As far as like what type of dollars are we talking about? So Mitch, you had mentioned earlier, okay, if it's 100,000, out of a $70 million budget, okay, how big of a deal is that? Maybe not so much, but all those little drops in the buckets add up, So as you've always said too. So that is our goal at the next meeting, is to kind of keep whittling down. We want to give you this kind of overall ideal, and then whittle down to be able to say, okay, this is where we're at, and then be able to kind of bring you like quarterly updates, because that's the other piece with this. the volatility of these of the projection is pretty can be significant. Again, the fact that we were surprised with the legislative change that came forward, and it was a significant amount of dollars. So I think that's something what we would do is we would seek that clarification now, maybe solidify something for you by say like March, and then bring something back to you 2 to 3 months later and say, hey, heads up, here's an update, here are some things that have changed that you need to be aware of, and then here's how it's going to impact our efforts, and then at least you'll have a general idea as we go into the annual meeting and budget hearing in August of where we're at. And again, going into next year is going to be easy. It's forecasting out beyond next year. That's going to be, again, I think we all just got to get on the same page and be able to kind of work through that. So I know, so the enrollment piece is going to be one. I know that we're going to be looking at risk insurance. I would like some more detail around the health insurance, Patrick. I do know that it's very difficult to project out, so in working with Hub, they're able to kind of give us some high level suggestions of what we should expect for increases. But at the same time, we just want to make sure we're on the same page with the board. Anything else that's specific that you would want more detail on to have Patrick present so that you can, again, make a more educated decision? Again, we're talking enrollment. We got the open enrollment clarification tonight. Risk, health insurance. Anything else that you would want to kind of just dig a little deeper in?
And I think if I can just comment on that, Joe,
Yep.
I'm really happy that you said that, because the best thing, or what's going to make this, I think, the most useful for you is if I get the guidance up front, so then I'm actually spending my time developing the projections that you're interested in seeing, as opposed to me sitting in my office coming up with 5 different projections and bringing them to the board and having you say, these are really cool and I love the colors, but I'd rather see this or I'd rather see that. I want this to be useful for you. So, let me know what you'd like to see, as opposed to just saying, well, let me see it all, because that's not a possibility.
I have just a question. These budgets for the next 5 years that you have on here, that doesn't really include any long-range facilities planning, correct?
You are absolutely correct, saying that in the area of purchase services, non-capital and capital expansion or expenses, I'm not projecting increases in any of those expenses right now, and we have defunded 2 of my directors sitting in the back there, Brandon and Andy. We've defunded their departments significantly, and so no, we're still not addressing any of those.
Okay, and maybe
that is a problem.
Right, and maybe we just give a quick update from the facilities committee that we are looking at creating a 5-year plan of items from the long-range plan that should be funded, and target what, Mitch, maybe like spring, we would have that to share with the rest of the board.
Hopefully you guys aren't spending a lot based on what we're seeing here.
So is there anything specifically we need for next meeting that you're asking for us to look into, or will we just have more further discussion next meeting?
And again, our plan is to bring back the health insurance recommendation and, enrollment that was just talked about, the risk insurance, a little bit more education on that. And then just a point of clarification, is the facilities committee prepared to bring something forth, or was that something, so not for the next meeting? Okay. So then just those 3 things, and then the facilities piece would be forthcoming as the committee determines.
But that will have to be a bigger board discussion, right? You guys will bring a recommendation and we'll.
coming with something
Awesome.
as a starting point.
Thanks, Kate.
It's not really a recommendation, it's just kind of what we're looking at and what we see is what we're doing.
And also, I remember from our discussion at our last meeting, it was also something nice to have for when we have the foundation and like home and school associations, when they're looking to help fund something, we have a list for them as well. Right, exactly. So it's not just us spending money as a board, it's having a nice list available for fundraising.
There were two things that were really going to make my work in the near future easy. You covered one of them tonight, and that was open enrollment, when you said make it cost neutral, okay? The second thing that would give me a great amount of direction would be, how conservative do you want me to be in projecting revenue limit dollars? Right now, I'm showing a significant reduction. Okay, do you want me to continue with that going forward? And we can always make those changes as we get closer to the new biennial budget. But, you know, in going forward, how conservative would you like to see me? Because that's going to have a huge impact.
And what I'd like to do, Patrick, for that, if it's okay with the board, is we did provide you information as far as previous trending, but certainly it literally depends on who is in the governor's chair and who's in control of the legislature. So we can bring that back to at least refresh your memory, and then we can maybe get direction at the next meeting as well. So that'll be another kind of mini presentation that we can add, Patrick, and you can get that clarification then.
Just some general feedback from what I've seen in past budgets. Now, obviously, this is before your tenure, but I'm looking at the 2017 budget, and it shows in 2022 we'd have a $9 million projected deficit. And so I feel like we have a lot of uncertainty 4 or 5 years out, and we build in these huge buffers. And I, for one, wouldn't like to see these huge cliffs because they generally don't happen. We know we're going to continue to get small increases in it, so my vote would be for that, to not be as conservative as we get further out. Because I think we are really close. I think your numbers are probably pretty accurate for the next 2 years, but then we see that huge cliff. And I'd like to see, I don't want you just to artificially move that line up, but I'd rather see a little bit more accurate depiction of what we believe it would be instead of a very conservative.
And that's important feedback for one reason and one reason only. I'm going to bring a projection, and then when the budget is actually passed, then there's going to be that point of comparison. And I want this to be our projection, not my projection. And that, you know, that's the kind of feedback that I'm going to look for. And trust me, as we get closer to that, I'm going to tell you the things that I'm hearing. I'm not just going to keep that a secret and go, oh, look, this is what you did. You know, this is what you told me to do. My job is to keep feeding you the information that I am hearing, like I did tonight with the risk insurance lines. You know, that there are huge increases that are coming that we are completely out of our control. So I'm going to keep feeding you that information as we work through this.
I'm just curious as to what in these estimates is being used as far as property values. Is it a usual 3% increase, or what did you use in that case?
Right, and I put in property value increases of 3% going forward. That does not impact our revenue. That only impacts the mill rate. So it's not that it's something I'm not concerned with. It's just that for our purposes right now, revenue and expenses are what we're looking at. And then we'll, you know, that stuff is all going to sort of flesh itself out in the future. I am, however, as I look through this, I don't see huge increases in or huge shifts in our mill rate. Right now, I think this last year we were right around 5%, 5.2% or something like that. So I'm putting in a 3%. Like I said, that's gonna impact mill rate, not necessarily revenue and expense. Where that's going to get more important is if the board is working on doing some other revenue generating strategies that may have an impact to property taxes.
I'm interested, Joe, in the presentation that you mentioned that you want to bring to us next time. So I'm really interested to see that. So as soon as that you can make that available, that'd be great. I think that as a general concept, Patrick, from me as a board member, I'd like it to be a conservative prediction, but I'd like it to be realistically conservative. Because if wildly predicting that we're going to have a $9 million deficit in 2017 when that didn't materialize, that seems to be an overstatement of the conservative values that were embraced. And it's not realistic then. And if it's not realistic, it's not helpful. So my view is that it has to be conservative because we have to prepare for unforeseen circumstances, contingency plans. But I don't want it to be unduly alarmist. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. Okay. That makes perfect sense. That's the way I typically like to budget. But I just need you to understand that and not an affirmation and let me know what information you'd like from me.
All right, so we will move forward with our next meeting and discuss some of those assumptions a little bit more in detail. Item D on our agenda is to discuss approved resolution authorizing issuance of individual procurement cards.
Okay, the purpose of this, currently the district employs a purchasing card or procurement card program. Essentially, it's a fancy term for a district credit card. Right now, we use a company called Agilex. Agilex has two components to its program. One of them is an electronic payment, which has a higher rate of return. It's roughly I think right now we get 1.8% or 1.9% a return on any of the bills that we pay through an auto pay, or not an auto pay, but through an electronic payment. The other component is the purchasing card, which the company that we currently work with is terrible. It's slightly less than 7%, or I'm sorry, 0.7% return. By changing our procurement card program from Agilex to BMO Harris, we can double our rebate on any of our purchasing card expenses, and we don't lose any of the rebate that we get from Agilex. And so what my recommendation tonight is, and this is what BMO Harris requires, that the board approve us contracting with BMO Harris for our procurement cards, and then we can move forward and go through that particular transition. And actually, I think I misspoke. The rebates that we get from our electronic payments is more along the lines of 3.8%. It's significantly higher.
Patrick, in the resolution, it says that we're authorizing the agreement with Bank of Montreal. Is that another part of BMO's operation?
That's what they are.
That's its full.
BMO is Bank of
name.
Montreal.
I did not know that.
They got
So,
sold,
thank
I
you.
think, a little
Thank
bit.
you. That's fine. I just
And
wanna
this is
make sure,
just,
'cause
like
it
I said,
doesn't
this
say-
is just what they require in order for us to sign a
They got
contract
sold.
I
with
figured.
them.
Yeah, that's fine.
Before and they got sold, I think.
Can I go ahead and make a motion?
Real quick on that, if we approve this, there'll be another proposal of how we're not just giving every individual in the entire district a P card, right? Thinking to the finance committee of what are the controls on that, and is that a later discussion that we have?
It's a later discussion, but I want you to know that I don't like the number of P cards that we have in the district, and I'm going to be recommending that we pull that number back. I have experience with BMO and being able to have all of the functionality with considerably less cards. The other thing that's nice about BMO, the controls that we have over it are, there's more functionality in the controls, and so, real time, we can increase, decrease the credit limits on cards you know, yeah, depending upon those. And so it's just a better program. I think the company we currently work with does it because it filled a need, not necessarily because they were really good at it.
Great, do I have a motion?
Yes, I move to approve resolution authorizing issuance of individual procurement cards as presented.
A motion by Ms. Manley, a second by Mr. Kurth. Any discussion? Do we need to read it? Or are we, okay.
I think we're good.
All right. All those in favor, raise your right hand.
Sorry, that was me. That was me. I was gonna like say.
All opposed? All opposed? Motion passes. This moves us on to action items from closed session.
I move to approve the employment, performance, and compensation matters pertaining to staff as presented.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Kurth, a second by Ms. Manley. Any discussion? All those in favor, raise your right hand.
I was gonna do it wrong again. What the heck?
Hands down, all opposed. Motion passes. This brings us to future meetings and dates. Our next meeting is January 27th at the West Commons with a facility committee meeting preceding that. Finance. Why did I write facility? Finance committee preceding that at 5:30. Our February 10th meeting will be at the Elmwood Library with a school tour. Our February 24th meeting will be at West in the Commons, with potentially a finance committee preceding that as well, right? No. Yeah.
That's what I talked with Diana Hansen about that. Yeah, she didn't, but we've talked about it'll be before the fourth meeting monthly.
Before the Monday.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then February 15th, as was talked about tonight, is the Eisenhower 50th anniversary celebration. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Kurth, a second by Ms. Manley to adjourn. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Hands down, all opposed. Motion passes. This meeting is adjourned.